Good evening and welcome to the first program of the Islesboro Forum for 2024. We have 6 wonderful programs for you this summer. I couldn't be more excited, and tonight's is one that will set the standard for the rest of the summer. So I'm Gail Jackson, and I will be the moderator for today's program. And I have a few housekeeping things. We will record our program, and you'll be able, or your friends, to find it on islesboroforum.org website with a little lapse of maybe 5 to 7 days. And also you can go to Islesboro Forum YouTube and find the recording, as well as past programs from past summers if you wish. I have to put in a little plug for a contribution to the program. We continue to have expenses, and just think in terms of maybe $10 a program and adjust that up or down depending upon your circumstances. And I think we have a basket right there on the stage where you could put any contribution. Before we introduce our speaker, I want to acknowledge my entire committee, because this roster of programs is the product of their good minds as well as mine to some extent. And so I'm going to look at my teleprompter to be sure I don't forget any of their names. Bruce, this is alphabetical order, Bruce Claflin, Helen Elkins, Nina Herrick, Peter Rothschild, who is our treasurer, myself, and a new member, Leslie Glotzel, who hit the ground running. She has handled the lion's share of publicity duties for us to get the word out, and we're very, very grateful to her. Our format tonight will be to hear remarks from our speaker, Kim Hamilton, who heads the Island Institute, and following her remarks, she will take questions. I'm going to ask Peter Rothschild to introduce Kim as he arranged for the program. So, Peter, over to you.
Thank you, Gail.
You are welcome.
Very briefly, yes, very briefly, I also have an announcement to make, which is next Sunday, we will be featuring Shay Conover and the Island Sea Level Rise Committee, and it will be preceded with a slideshow that Jeff is helping me put together, showing you all pictures of what it was like on this island on January 10th, 13th, and March 10th. It's very dramatic. If you haven't seen the pictures already, you will be surprised and perhaps chastened by what it was like. The Island Institute was founded in 1983 by Philip Conklin and Peter Ralston, both longtime very good friends of mine. It's gone through some new reiterations, and it has become a vital part of sustainability on the coast of Maine. Its new president, Kim Hamilton, as Gail mentioned, has a very impressive resume of doing all sorts of things all over the world and the United States, including affordable housing and food banking, as well as being the chief strategist for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation years ago. So she brings a level of expertise that I think is we're extraordinarily pleased to have her at the helm, and she is assisted by Jennifer Seavey, who's the Chief Programs Officer, who will also speak to you this evening. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce Kim and hope that we will see you all again next week. And I should say, I am the new treasurer, brand new. We have a bank account in Camden, and your contributions will be carefully and effectively and officially taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. One small correction. I wasn't the chief strategist for the entire foundation, but really for one of the divisions, which was an honor. But just wanted to put that in context and just say thank you all for being here tonight, and especially to Peter for giving us the opportunity to share some more about Island Institute. I want to thank Gail and Jeff also for setting the stage so perfectly for us. So this is my second ferry trip today. I live on Shebig Island in Casco Bay. So a beautiful day to come here and have a conversation. I did want to say I am about a little over a year into this role as the new president of Island Institute. So I'm really coming at this conversation with a beginner mindset. This is my second trip to Islesboro, so I'm hoping very much that we can learn as much as we're sharing with you today. And I wanted first to introduce Dr. Jen Seavey. Jen joined us just a year ago as our Chief Programs Officer, coming to us from Shoals Marine Lab. Many of you may know that that's located in southern Maine on Appledore Island. And Jen was there as the Executive Director. It's a joint program of the University of New Hampshire and Cornell University. Jen's an expert in climate resiliency, natural resource conservation, and also wildlife science. So I was really excited that Jen was available to join us here tonight. So our hope is that we'll share some information about what we're calling coastal forces and community responses. And then at the same time, I'm hoping that the conversation that follows, that we can continue to build our own knowledge about some of the specific issues that are affecting this particular community. So I'll cover the issues that are shaping the community, the coastal forces, and that Jen will talk specifically about some of the ways that Island Institute is addressing this. And then just quickly before I start, I want to give a shout out to Shay Conover, who's here. Shay is one of our wonderful board members. She was also an Island Institute fellow, also oversaw our programmatic work at one point in her career at Island Institute. And one of the reasons and ways that Island Institute stays really connected to communities is because we have board members like Shay who are deeply committed and connected in their own community, and it's really a fundamental part of the way we compose our board. So Shay, thank you. I know you're on next week, so. Let's see. All right. Wanted to talk a little bit about Island Institute for those of you who are less familiar with us. We're a 40-year-old community development organization. We focus our efforts, obviously, on Maine's coastal communities and on our islands. And our mission is to boldly navigate climate and economic change with island and coastal communities to expand opportunity and deliver solutions. There are a lot of things I love about that particular mission statement, but the thing I like best is the word with. I think that really goes to the DNA of Island Institute. There's very little that we do without deep consultation with communities and working closely in communities. We think a lot about where community wisdom meets policy science and strong programmatic execution, and I like to think this with concept is one of our differentiators. So last year we celebrated our 40th anniversary, which was a great opportunity to look backwards and to take stock of what we've done, but I'm much more interested in thinking about what's ahead of us and what are we going to celebrate in the next 10 years. And so today, really wanted to talk about 6 themes that are emerging as we're doing our own strategy refresh and making sure that we're staying apace with all of the changes that are happening all along the coast. So I'll touch on each of these, and then in turn, I'm going to turn it over to Jen to talk about some of the solutions we're pursuing. So the first one, and not surprising, is sea level rise and stronger storms. So after the 2 back-to-back 100-year storms in January, I think there's no surprise that this is on the list. This is shorthand, of course, for a much more complex set of issues that relate both to climate adaptation and also to climate mitigation. And I think what we're seeing is that there are a lot of questions that communities are wrestling with. How do we build back higher, greener, stronger? What does affordability look like in this concept? And is retreat actually maybe the best option to consider? We also see communities looking at how to build clean, predictable, resilient energy systems, manage wildfire risks, and also to protect critical community assets. The second issue is around housing affordability and availability. So housing issues, of course, are not new on islands for sure, but the acute needs that we are seeing after the pandemic in particular, I think are particularly vexing. So when we talk about housing, we're usually bundling a whole bunch of issues there, from housing affordability and the quality of housing to things like land and resource use, including the capacity of local aquifers to provide water and the growth of new homes that are being built on many of these islands. We're also talking about, short and long-term rentals, and so all of these issues are really coming together. I did want to say that this is an area where I am particularly hopeful. I've always thought of islands not as sort of nostalgic places sort of caught in amber, but really as hotbeds of innovation. And I think housing is a great example of where we're seeing some really interesting models that are emerging, especially on islands. Housing, however, is one of those fundamental issues that directly relates the next theme, which is around aging population, our volunteer base, and schools and education. I'm formally trained as a demographer, so the intersection of people and place is of special interest to me. And the issue we're hearing a lot about on islands is really sort of the aging of our year-round island populations. And to put this in context, the average age in Maine is about 44.8. On Shebig, the island where I live, the average age is slightly over 55. It's 55.6. And I think I have the most up-to-date statistic for Islesboro, which was surprising to me. The average age is over 62. And so while the Maine coast is absolutely seeing some increases in population and more diversification of the population, more than other inland parts of Maine, islands face very unique challenges, and it's showing up in a lot of ways. I think you all know this. Our volunteers are getting tired, and there aren't a lot of people to step into their shoes. This leaves important community organizations understaffed and under-resourced. In some communities, there aren't enough volunteers to deal with basic things like EMT services and ambulance services and fire services, and many communities are turning to per diem solutions, and this in turn leads to some housing issues as well. And then for some communities, I would say the schools are shrinking, raising questions about the cost of schools and the sustainability of those schools. For some communities, what we're hearing is that this actually feels like an existential threat. Are we going to survive as a year-round working community, or are we on the pathway to be a summer getaway and a summer gateway? The next issue is around the future of our fisheries. This theme, of course, is around the regulatory environment and the changes to the climate of the Gulf of Maine. So many communities and certainly families are deeply dependent on lobstering for their income. Certainly the state of Maine as a whole, the lobstering industry, if you look all across the supply chain, the lobstering industry is a central pillar for our economic development as a state and our economy. But what we're seeing is the challenge is not just about how do we sustain the lobstering industry, it's about how do we diversify incomes. So looking not only at aquaculture, but at other sorts of ways to diversify within the marine economy. I'm not going to dwell too much on this because Jen has a lot to say, but I did want to underscore that one of the things I love about Maine is that we have extraordinary organizations like ours. We've got research institutions, and we also have academic institutions that are really focused on this issue. And so I'm excited that across the state there are organizations that are really pulling together to look at this. The next issue is protecting our working waterfront, which is, of course, closely related to the future of fisheries. And this is really about making people and helping people understand how critical access is to the working waterfront, and to make sure that they understand that this is sort of the factor that makes a difference for those fishing communities. In 2005, Island Institute completed a comprehensive mapping of the working waterfront all along the coast. In fact, Shay led that body of work. And coming out of that work, we identified 80 locations that provided very comprehensive services. We know for sure that the number is shrinking drastically, meaning there's much less access to those waters for folks who choose fishing and other ways to make their living off the water. A good friend of mine is the director of communications for the National Zoo, and we were talking about the panda and how do we apply the panda concept to the working waterfront. And so the working waterfront is not cuddly, it's not something as relatable, but we really do need to think about this in terms of a campaign to help people understand just how critical the conservation is for this particular part of our ecosystem. And then the last thing I want to talk about is predictable and affordable ferry service. Lastly, this is an especially hot button issue here in Penobscot Bay, as many of you are experiencing. I understand this as somebody who also lives on an island. For those of us who live on islands, ferries are like our public road. So sometimes there are access to an ambulance, and for nearly everyone, they are a critical lifeline to services on the mainland. So disruptions, fare increases, unpredictable services aren't just annoying, they really go to making sure that we can sustain life and live on islands as we know it. So the threats feel particularly real around changes within the ferry system. So balancing what is fair with what is economically viable is really bubbling up as a very hot issue that we're seeing in some of the communities that we're working with. So that is a very fast and quick overview of some of the issues we're seeing. I've handed you a bunch of intractable issues, and I'm hoping now that Jen can provide some hope as we go forward.
All right, Jeff? Okay. All right, thanks, Kim, for that setup, and I have all the solutions for you, okay? So I wanted to start first with a little bit of an overview of how our programs are organized at the Island Institute. So we recently, about a year ago, set up 3 centers. So the first center is the marine economy. And in the marine economy, we create and work towards diversifying a climate-friendly marine economy of the future. The next center is climate and communities. There we focus on building climate resilience through mitigation, adaptation, and hope. The third center is for sustainable communities, where we fuel community-led innovation with capacity through our fellowship program, something you're all aware of probably here, network program, and education work. We also have this incredible tool in the Tom Glenn Community Impact Fund, and that helps us make grants, loans, and investments in both businesses and community projects. So I just thought I would start with a topic that is very much on your minds, I know, and that is sea level rise. And so here is a figure from 1900 through predictions out to 2030. This is NOAA data, National Oceanographic Atmospheric data. And since 1910, we have all experienced 7.5 inches of sea level rise here in Maine. And the scientific models over the next 75 years show roughly, depending on the model, 4 feet of sea level rise. So this is obviously an issue that is going to continue to put pressure on the islands and the coasts. So what is the Island Institute doing to help with this particular issue? So first of all, science communication, information, data, thought leadership that is specifically translated and crafted for municipality and business use applications. Next up, planning, helping both private businesses and municipalities figure out their priorities, their solutions, their opportunities. That naturally, of course, leads to where do you get the funding? So our sort of shepherding of communities and businesses into state and federal programs, like, for example, Islesboro in 2022 began work on sea level rise in part through the state CRP process that the Island Institute helped with. We have our own granting program. I was just telling you about the Glen Fund, and Islesboro actually received money from that fund this year to do a video on the Narrows project. So that's coming to you soon. And then there's other partnership opportunities as well. Other partners have a lot of great funding opportunities that we know about and bring people to. Speaking of partnerships, we also work with organizations like Land Trusts to help figure out and craft working waterfront easements. In fact, we help the state pass legislation that allows land trusts to hold easements on working waterfronts in the first place. And right now, we're helping land trusts craft those easements. What do they look like? What do the working waterfront fishermen, boat yards need, and what does a land trust need? So how can we marry those? That's kind of like the Farmland Trust, if you know that program. So that's emerging here in Maine. We also support and facilitate coalitions like the Working Waterfront Coalition, the Maine Island Coalition that Shay does many things for this community, I can tell. And she actually sits on that coalition as well. So one thing that we think a lot about with regard to sea level rise is how to get more nature-based solutions in front of businesses and communities. And maybe at the end or in our discussion, we can talk a little bit about that. So, of course, you all experienced those January storms. Those had unprecedented damage across the state, $70 million by some estimates in just Maine alone. And the day the storm was unfolding in front of all of our eyes, the Island Institute staff came together and really started thinking about what do we have in practice right now? What are we already doing? How can we leverage this all in this moment? And 9 days after that storm, we gave out our first grant. And this map with all of the locations is the locations of 52 grants that we gave out as storm response grants. We were the first organization to give out money. We're really proud of this really fast acting response, and we learned a lot. We gave out $250,000. Over half of them were to islands, 20 towns. We supported over 1,000 commercial vessels and 540 jobs. And through that process, we talked to all the folks who were asking for money and were looking for money and looking for help, and we gathered a ton of information, like what are their financial issues, what are their insurance issues, all of these things, and we brought it to the state, and that actually influenced the state's $50 million storm recovery efforts, 25 of which was carved out specifically for working waterfront. In the days and the weeks after that, we used every channel that we had to communicate to islands and the coast and beyond about the storm impacts. We hosted webinars, we did media interviews, we sent out emails to all of our constituents, especially the working waterfront. We launched a new aspect of our website that has lots of resources that's still there, being updated all the time on how to deal with storm recovery. Thousands of people were engaged. It was actually some of our biggest social media engagements that we've ever had. So people were really interested, and we had a lot of great information to bring to them. And our work continues in many ways. I do want to point out that Islesboro got Islesboro Oyster got a grant as a result of this grant program. So Kim talked a little bit about the fisheries. So as you can imagine, the sea level rise and storms, big problem for the fisheries, but of course they're also changing rapidly warming waters, a lot of big changes in regulatory aspects and rising business costs. So being a lot of pressure on them from all sides. And they're hugely important to the state, like culturally and economically, about $3 billion annually to the state's economic value and over 30,000 jobs. So the Island Institute is really focused on economic opportunity, expanding that, enhancing business resilience in the fishing-dependent communities. And we're doing this through partnerships with economic development organizations, banks, Chamber of Commerce, education institutions, fisheries institutions, and then leaders and leading leaders in the fishing community. And we're working really on three things to help build economic opportunity, and that is supporting entrepreneurship and diversifying income, business resilience skills development, And then strengthening community assets, and by that I mean really the working waterfront, that shoreside infrastructure. If they don't have that point of contact with the land, then them being at sea, how do they move across that? A thing that we're really grappling with in this arena is that, as you can imagine, as I just listed, the fisheries communities are under a lot of pressure from a lot of sides. There's a lot of challenges. It's political, it's emotional. How do we, the Island Institute, break through that noise? I would love to talk about that at the end as well, if you're interested in that topic. Generally speaking, we are helping communities navigate resilience and get ready for climate change across a lot of ways. Some I just showed you, and we're doing it more broadly through some other efforts. And one thing that Kim and I and all of us at the Island Institute have talked a lot about, and I suspect that you feel it here, based especially on what you're going to talk about next time this group comes together, is that those big winter storms we experienced this past winter really underlined for most communities the need to do something. And a lot of communities are really interested in doing something, not just planning for it, but taking some action. And so we're very excited to take advantage of that and building capacity to help communities do that. But we really do want to understand the friction around the capacity and the ability of island and coastal communities. So would love to hear about that as well. But we are enhancing capacity through programs like the Island Institute Fellowship Program. So Liv, who's on the island right now, she's been helping with sea level rise, with the Sea Level Rise Committee on the island, to specifically around the Narrows Project. So you're experiencing that sort of added capacity through that program. We also have an entire team that helps communities plan in the Climate Center, and they take advantage of Maine Community Resilient Partnership Program, a state program that helps communities plan and identify their priorities for a climate readiness. And Islesboro was actually one of the first communities to go through that program with the Island Institute. And since then, we have supported 11 communities in this process, mostly on islands again. We are taking action from docks to entire municipal energy systems. So many of you are probably quite aware of the Pendleton Yacht Yard and the energy systems that they've built, the solar panels and grid and battery backup. We didn't do that with them, just to be clear, but that's the kind of thing that we are doing in other communities with working waterfront partners. And it addresses not only climate change, but their costs. So it's a really win-win for a lot of that working waterfront infrastructure. And you might have noticed that they have an electric boat called Take Charge. Anyone seen that? All right, you're gonna have to look for it. We help them obtain that boat. Here's a picture of it so you know what to look for. And that is a pilot to show and demonstrate the use of electric boats as tenders in the working waterfront arena. And we are also working with communities to transition to clean power. Clean power is resilient, affordable, climate friendly, sustainable. Again, Islesboro, you just keep winning awards for being among the first. And Islesboro was at the first cohort of a Department of Energy program that we partner with Department of Energy on to help communities explore clean energy systems. And here you have been exploring, and we've been doing this work ongoing with you since 2021 to explore microgrids for renewable energy battery storage. And that's the kind of thing we're doing up and down the coast and on islands. And finally, we are supporting the Maine Climate Action Plan, both the original and it's being updated. It will be fully updated by December, and we have a number of staff working on task groups, on working groups, task force, on the technical committees, and one of our staff, Susie Arnold, is a chapter editor. So that is just a taste of the things that we are doing in programs, and I'm going to invite Kim back up to talk about what's happening here.
Thanks, Jen. I just thought we'd close with some very specific things and investments that we've done here in this particular community. 5 board members from Islesboro have served on our board of trustees, leaving their mark and shaping our organization. It's such a really critical role, and we're so thankful for their support. We've had 12 Island Institute fellows fellows. Thanks, Jeff. We've had 12 Island Institute fellows, and just very quickly, the fellows program is like a Peace Corps program on the islands. The fellows come for 2 years and work on committed projects or an extra pair of hands on these islands and really do great things to help islands tackle some difficult projects. Liv, of course, is here now. Over 100 travel, workforce, and educational scholarships, over $260,000 of investments in that since 2015. Another $30,000 in grants for some specific projects at the Light Station, the Community Center, and now moving forward, the Narrows Flood Adaptation Project. Jen just mentioned the Take Charge boat, and then also the energy transitions work that we've been doing with the Department of Energy. So this looks very much like the work we're doing with islands and other coastal communities, but I just really wanted to give you a sense of the historical perspective here on this island, and not just the way Island Institute has supported this community, but the way this community has also supported Island Institute. And then lastly, before we turn it over to questions, I just wanted to say, please stay in touch. There may be issues that we didn't tackle today that you want to talk more about. Maybe you want to learn about the scholarship program, some of the other work that we've talked about. Please reach out to me or Jen, and we can make sure to put you in touch with the right folks at Island Institute if we don't have the answers, and just very much look forward to a continuing conversation with the community of Islesboro. So thank you very much. That was fast, and we really wanted to open up to some questions. Thank you. We couldn't see you very well, so I'm very happy to have the light shed on all of this. Yes, any questions?
Sure, if I like going first or not, but I will. Thank you both very much, Jen and Kim, and I appreciate exactly all that you've talked about. One of the forces that play in Penobscot Bay is a regional and a state type of force, and it's a major force, and it has to do with the possibility of an industrialized future for Penobscot Bay that would have a pretty clearly negative effect on small-scale working waterfront kinds of activities in the economy. That has to do with manufacturing offshore wind turbines, either at Mac Point or at Sears Island. It is a climate change issue. That is, quite clearly, first and foremost, what this is about, because it has to do with building turbines and then putting them in the Gulf of Maine for renewable sources of energy. So it's a climate change issue, but Islesboro Island Trust has been engaged in this, since 2021, when the Governor's Office of the Department of Transportation first publicly issued a report saying that Sears Island should be developed and not Mac Point. And so it's kind of gone from that place. What I'd like to say about, or ask you about with the Island Institute, is your role as information provider. You folks with the Working Waterfront, with the Journal, with your website, are really a go-to place for a lot of islanders to get good, clear, factual information about sometimes pretty controversial issues. This is clearly a controversial issue. What seems to be what is the driving force? We have evidence to show that the driving force for developing Sears Island is to expand that into the future into a major industrialized port. There is evidence for that, but that's not really being reported. It's a very complicated climate change issue, and those issues aren't really being parsed out. So research or in-depth kind of reporting would be tremendously helpful so that we all understand, North Haven, Vinyl Haven, Idaho, everybody in the Bay, as well as the neighboring communities on the mainland, could help understand really what's at play here. We need to get our response to climate change right. We can't do it the wrong way. And I'm afraid that we might find ourselves down the road doing it wrong on Sears Island. So I was wondering if you could kind of comment on how the Island Institute could help develop and disseminate good natural information on something?
It's a great question, and I know this is a big issue here. I'm going to talk about this at a high level, and then maybe, Jen, you could share a couple of different things. So I would say at a high level, not surprising for an organization that cares about climate change, we think offshore wind is a technology that needs to be explored. That being said, our particular interest is making sure that communities have the information that they need to make smart decisions when the offshore wind and the opportunities there are affecting those communities. And so whether it comes to community benefits or other kinds of agreements, making sure communities are well armed with the information that they need. I mean, the best outcome, right, is where we've got, you know, strong climate solutions that also match with community needs. And your question comes right as we are going through our strategy refresh. And one of the things we've really identified as an area of opportunity for us is really around this thought leadership piece that you talked about. Some of you may have seen an article in the Working Waterfront that came out recently by Tom Groening, our editor, and it was really, I think, the first comprehensive piece we've put together, and we're talking about putting more of those out so people have the information, to your point, to be able to understand the vastness and the complexity of this particular issue. But Jen and the program team have also been thinking about this, so Jen.
Maybe it'd be better to pass it back a little bit. Yeah, so thus the reorganization into the centers and our strategic refocus on thought leadership is actually hitting the very point that you're making, which I'm really grateful for, around the importance of information. And information, we need the best available science to possibly make a good, wise decision about a climate-friendly, resilient, affordable way forward with clean energy. And so that is where we are focused on finding that best available data and information, but then translating it for municipalities, community groups, businesses to be able to act on and make some wise decisions. So that is where a lot of our focus and our expertise around the clean energy development in communities and our science expertise kind of come together nicely with community development at the Island Institute, which as a scientist, I really appreciate having that sort of full view, that holistic view of what communities need to make wise decisions.
Yeah, I just wanted to maybe ask you a question too, as you think about the kind of information that's not out there that would be especially of use for this particular community. I'd love to know what that looks like. And then the other piece that I think is worth underscoring, it came through, I think, a bit in our conversation, but probably not with a sharp enough point on it. We do have a policy team that is following these kinds of issues, and that is something that we activate occasionally. And so really understanding, you know, where is the point in this conversation where we might activate something like that would be important, but, you know, understanding what is the information, you know, behind those kinds of actions. So I'd love to just to know, you know, what's missing as you're looking at this particular issue for anyone, really.
Could I ask a follow-up to one of the items you mentioned, which was the ferry service being affordable? And my understanding is that we're due to have an electric ferry in the future, but that it would be based on the mainland, not on the islands. Are you having that issue with other islands, and how do we get around that? Because that adds an hour getting to the hospital or whatever the need is to our residents.
So the question, I want to come back to make sure we've got the information on the Sears Island issue, but the question here is around the Maine State Ferry Service and where it's located. So when it's located on the mainland, it's a long trip to get here when there are emergencies that need to be addressed. And so what is the Island Institute doing around that? We were very involved with the Maine State Ferry Service study. was it last year, Jen? We completed the study last year, and one of the issues that came up is specifically this, and so we're continuing these conversations, working closely with the Maine State Ferry Service, trying to represent the interest of communities to see if there's some kind of resolution into where those ferries are located. So it is part of what our policy team is advocating for. Yes, specifically, yes, working with the Maine State Ferry Service, yeah. There you go.
Well, I just also wanted to mention that we have a transportation coalition that is made up of all the different types of businesses that offer all kinds of transportation to the islands, from the ferry service to plane service. And so we have a direct line of communication with them as well, bringing the voices of the communities directly to those businesses as well. So that is a hot topic. Emergency services and figuring if ferries have to be on the mainland, are there other avenues for emergency services? All of that is being explored.
Arch.
I just want to follow up on what Steve has talked about. So my question is simple. Has the Island Institute made a decision about whether the assembly of the windmills should take place on Mack Point or on Sears Island, and the consequences for each of those choices?
So, Arch, we haven't taken a position on that. And again, back to where we started, this really is about how do we make sure that all communities have the information to make the decisions that are right for those communities. So we've not taken a public position on that.
Well, we have plenty of information. We don't lack for information. We lack for leadership. And I don't hear it from you.
I wasn't sure that you wanted me to actually try to begin to convey the list of issues that I think are either misrepresented or underrepresented or erroneously represented in media coverage so far. But I can do that, and I probably can do that offline with you. But,
That would be great.
But I think the biggest one, from my standpoint, has to do with what so many of us here think is the, obvious carbon emissions footprint for developing Sears Island versus an already industrialized Sears Mack Point, Sears Island Mack Point. There are pretty clearly major carbon emission development, footprints for those two, and they're they're likely to be very, very significantly different. But either, that study hasn't been done. We may well see that. It certainly is a subject that will come up for permitting review. But there are statements being made by state authorities already saying, well, the least environmentally damaging alternative is Sears Island. And there's no basis for that I've seen. And we've been involved with the Offshore Wind Port Advisory Group and all the other kinds of places where information has been made available. So, and there was a carbon emissions addendum to a recent application to the Federal Highway Administration about all of it, about carbon. And frankly, it was an embarrassment. I was really embarrassed to read what I read there. It was just so off the chart. So anyway, we also have compiled all the references in the state policy statements from Climate Council and others that say we're going to do this in the least environmentally damaging way. And we aren't seeing that. So to me, that's the biggest problem. And teasing out all those issues that are related to that carbon emissions footprint, I think is going to take some work, and it's not necessarily easy reading either, but it can be done. One thing that just occurred to me this evening is that perhaps the Island Institute, without taking a position, might want to consider some kind of sponsoring some kind of a forum. So far, we've had presentations from different groups in Searsport, which tend to make it sound like it's only a Searsport issue when it isn't. It's a state and regional issue. But nonetheless, I think bringing different parties to a forum that's open to the public might be a good fall project.
So two things. I hear the disappointment, and so what I can commit to you is make sure we come back with our policy, Nick Batista, who's our chief policy officer, to sit down and really understand what the issues are from this community. And your comment around, could there be a forum? Could there be some sort of educational role? Those are the kinds of things we're looking at now as we get into this particular issue. So very much on the same page there. Yeah. Other questions?
Could I ask a follow-up question? Later this summer, we will have the Maine Monitor's editor here as a speaker. They have an excellent member of their staff who covers environmental and energy matters, does very good investigative reporting. Would that not be a good vehicle for gathering this information and presenting it in a way that the public can digest and understand, and have it distributed throughout the communities that are nearby?
So we work closely with the Maine Monitor, and so I think there are a lot of ways through partnerships with the Working Waterfront, Maine Monitor, and some other places that we can make sure we're doing our best to get that information out there. It's a great suggestion. I know Tom works closely with that particular newspaper. Yeah. Other questions?
Well, I wanted to commend the Island Institute for work you've been doing. I'm from Cape Cod, and I recently came here to do some work, some seasonal work. And I at every level, fisheries, seaweed, shellfish. I have a small grant with a collective of friends on the Cape in Brewster on the tidal flats. We don't have any conversations, so it's just really inspiring, and I'm very honored to be here. My question is, we on the Cape seem to focus on intense development, and so we were trying to protect the water recharge areas and sensitive environmental areas, and I'm wondering if you're monitoring wells or doing other things to consider water quality as with salinity and sea rise and long-term and short-term.
Yeah, so the question was about water quality and monitoring and its relationship to development. We are not a science organization in that we don't do science, but we have partnerships with scientists. So, and there's a lot of very good water quality monitoring happening in different parts of Maine, and we take that information and help translate it into communities so that when communities are doing planning, especially around climate planning, that they are taking that information into account so they can make their decisions wisely. As you know, development has a lot of impact on that.
Yeah, the other piece to the question is some of the grants we make to climate action teams, for example, on different islands are supporting their work to go out and do the own water testing on those islands. One of our Island Institute fellows is working with MDIBL this year and working on water quality testing in some of the most remote islands. And so sort of through that extension and through providing those grants in that capacity, we're helping islands get that information and other communities. Yeah. It's really coming up over and over again, both in terms of housing, but just sea level rise as well is a really critical issue. Yeah. Other questions? Yeah. Other questions? Yeah.
I don't have a question, but I wanted to add to the story about granting. You have a long list of associations between the Island Institute and Islesboro. I'd like to add two more. The lights that are illuminating this room and those in the rest of the building came to a succession of grants from the Island Institute for future LED upgrades. And the EV charger in the parking lot was also supported by the Island Institute.
Excellent, thank you. As I said, I'm a little over a year into this role, and so I'm learning more every time we speak with communities about the legacy that we've had, so thank you. We'll add those to the list.
Is the Institute involved at all on dam removal initiatives that are going on across the state, which, as I understand it, do support biodiversity in the Gulf?
That's not an issue that we're involved in. Yeah. Jen, unless there's more. Yeah. No.
It's not a topic that's come up in any of our communities, so I'd be curious if if there is an intersection.
Just following up on Jen's comment about the ferries, clearly the problem we have with the ferry access to Islesboro, which must be duplicated on many other islands, is much more than where the ferry is located and how long it takes to come across. You know, on the 13th of January and the 10th of March, the ferry landing in Lincolnville was inaccessible. The water, you will see in the photos, was coming across Route 1 into the storefronts in Lincolnville. And this is a very complicated problem that goes far beyond just how the power source of the ferry. And I wonder if the Island Institute can become more proactive in urging the state to think more comprehensively about longer-term ferry access to Islesboro specifically. I know there's huge demands on the state and federal government to address sea level rise, but really access to the island in the future, assuming even the 4-foot rise in sea level is a overly pessimistic view, we've got serious issues going forward.
Did everyone hear that question? So a couple of things come to mind, Peter, around that. I think as we're starting to look at the long list of issues that we talked about today, the importance of our policy work is coming to the fore, because these are not insignificant projects. They're going to require state resources. They're going to require longer term planning. They're going to require communities working together. And so we're really looking closely at what of these issues really need more of a policy solution than simply, you know, a grant or some programmatic work to move a body of work forward. So going forward, we're really thinking about, okay, how do we use advocacy, communications, policy, all of that kind of work to crowd more resources into these particular issues, to raise awareness and to get more action by state legislators, the state, and in some instances, the federal government on these particular issues. I think a great example of that are a couple of recent ones. With the earmarks that are coming out through the federal government, we've really stood beside some communities in their applications for some significant federal earmarks to really support those applications, put in letters of support, make sure we're working with our federal representatives to make sure they understand how important those investments are for those communities. We had some really great successes in this past round where a couple of communities are getting significant funds to help rebuild their pier and have other kinds of infrastructure investments. So I think the policy part of this is really coming to the fore in the work that we're doing. That's a good question.
And I would just add a little bit to that, which is that the ferry service is in a parallel world with the working waterfront. And so there's a lot of talk in the Working Waterfront Coalition and circles around the policy around that, because it's, can we sustain over potentially 4 feet of sea level rise every single working waterfront that exists right now? How can we be thoughtful and strategic and think about hubs and think about where we put investments for ferries? Should we put investments for working waterfront? Like thinking strategically about the places that have to be on the water. You can't get to the island without a point of contact on the mainland. You can't get to the ocean without a point of contact. Like there's no negotiation there, but we have to be thoughtful and strategic about the wise use of big dollars that is going to take. So that's a lot of the conversation around working waterfront that is actually in parallel with the ferry service.
I see a question here.
How large is your non-clerical staff?
Oh. I don't have a specific answer. I'm gonna have to think about that because most of our work is programmatic. So our total staff, let me be specific here, our total staff is 65. That includes the 10 Island Institute fellows. And then of that 55, I'd say about probably 48 of those are programmatic. So that would include our working waterfront newspaper. It includes all of our programmatic work. I think some of you know we've got a storefront called Archipelago in Rockland. So it would include the programmatic staff that work there. So it's pretty diverse and broad.
I just want to commend the Island Institute for choosing two bright women to head up the work.
Well, thank you for noticing. We appreciate it. Yes.
I wrote down your issues around the offshore wind, and so there'll be more.
Yeah. Here you
Thank
go.
you.
Sure.
Thank you very, very much, Kim and Jen. That was a program that's highly relevant to Islesboro. I think the tenor of the questions, you can feel the emotion and energy and passion behind the questions. It should be absolutely energizing to you to know that you are so meaningful to this island. And I really learned a lot about the extent to which you are interwoven with Islesboro. You're very smart to get Shay to serve on your board. We think the world of her. And if every board member is as capable and thoughtful and prepared as Shay has proven to be in my interactions with her, you're very fortunate indeed. So I'm delighted we've had this conversation. I have the feeling that it has stirred up thoughts and suggestions and possible actions that will flow from it. Not all of our programs do that, so I think it's very encouraging that it's gone in that direction. So thank you again. Peter, thank you for setting it up. And I'll just take a moment to remind you all that next week we have the Sea Level Rise Committee, led by Shay Conover, and a video and a discussion of those very important issues. So please come and join us at that meeting as well. And with that, I think I can declare ourselves adjourned and have a good evening.